are recording. And this is the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum Oral History Project. This is Charlie McKay. I'm Hannah Nordhaus, and it is the 6th of August, 2003, and we are at the Church Ranch Center.
Well, we call it Corporate Center here, but you're at the Church Ranch office or headquarters office or whatever you want to call it.
We're at the Church Ranch.
Yeah.
All right. So to start, why don't you tell me a little bit about your personal background, where you were born, grew up, schooling.
Okay. Born and raised in Evanston, Illinois.
You know what? Hold on. I need to put this on you.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. If you can clip that. I don't remember that.
Okay.
You can clip that fairly close to your face. That would be great.
Right.
Could you clip? Turn it the other way. It's facing me. Maybe put it. Yeah, there you go.
So like this.
Yeah, that's better.
Like that. Is that right or not?
Here.
Yeah.
Pardon my
That's
proximity. Let's do it. Let's do it on the other one.
okay.
Let's face
So
the
it's a
other way.
left-handed mic.
Yeah, I'm a left-handed person.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Okay, start again. So I'm just going to go over in case they couldn't hear. It's August 6th. This is the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum Oral History Project, and I'm interviewing Charlie McKay.
Right.
Okay, so born and raised.
Born and raised in Evanston, Illinois. Born in 1940. Probably the first time I came here was about 42. My mother was Ruth Church. My full name is Charles Church McKay. I can remember about 42, believe it or not. I was about 2 years old, and I can remember being right here at this ranch riding an old horse called Stardust. That was, of course, a big deal for a 2-year-old. And then I was back and forth to Colorado numerous times. There were some gaps where I didn't come to Colorado at all for a few years, but always was in constant pen pal contact with my uncle Marcus Church. Marcus was my mom's brother, and he really ran the ranch from the early. He ran it with my grandmother from the early 40s. In 1940, my grandfather, Frank F.J. Church, died. He got hit by a train on Old Wadsworth, right down the street. It was below zero out, and then those days they had the signals that swung back and forth, and it was frozen. And he was going to town to get some fuel oil to keep the furnaces going. And he had his 2 dogs with him in the pickup, and of course in those days, if you can remember, they never had those long, gentle grades going over railroad tracks. You'd drive up to a railroad track and it would hump up like that, and you go over and back down. So he'd come up there and had shifted into low gear to pull the grade to go over the top, and one of the neighbors waved to him, and he waved back, or he waved to him, thinking there's a train coming, and he said good morning and drove right in front of the train. The train drug him a mile and a half before the freight train got stopped. But so I was in and out of Colorado for years. I had a horse that my uncle gave me, I think when I was 9 years old, a black horse by the name of Ann. I named her Ann. It was a mare because my Aunt Ann was my uncle's wife. I would come out here in the summer, and my uncle would send me I understand that now, because in our busy lives, even your busy lives back then, to have a kid underfoot all the time is kind of a pain, because you have to get your other stuff done. So he would say, in the morning, I want you to be ready, have your horse saddled and ready to go at 7 o'clock in the morning, and my aunt would have a sandwich and a pear or an apple or something, and he'd say have a bottle of water, a canteen, and he'd send me up to Stanley Lake to count cattle and look at fences and count calves. And he would always send me, there was always something that I didn't do right, so he'd send me back the next day, and I'm sure that was by design and probably kind of teaching me and training me to observe and do more and think more. I always had a love for Colorado, and I always had a love, always wanted to be a farmer and a rancher. I went to the University of Arkansas to be in the School of Agriculture. But I never did get my chance until my uncle died in '79. And when he died, I came back here and did farming and ranching, but it was tough. We still raise cattle. I still raise Hereford cattle. Our family brought the first Hereford cattle to Colorado in 1869, and we still raise Hereford cattle. We also raise black Baldies, which is a black bull bred to a white-faced Hereford. I did dry land wheat. Our family was the first one to introduce dry land wheat to the state of Colorado. First ones to do that, first ones to bring Hereford cattle. My great-grandfather and grandmother up there on the wall, where my grandfather was the first one to, yeah, that's a great idea. He was the first one to introduce irrigation to the state of Colorado on the eastern slope.
You the one in the middle?
He's the one in the middle. The one on the left was my grandfather, Frank, and then the one on the right was Sarah H. Church, and she wrote a diary called Crossing the Plains. And the fact is, I could make that available to you if you'd like. Sure. It's pretty interesting, you know. She wrote it as they crossed, and there's a lot of pretty good stories in there. She also wrote a commentary on how to raise children. A lot of interesting stuff. You can see those history books up there. Church family is in some of those. The Bible way on the left. There are actually two Bibles. One goes back to the 1600s, and it was passed down, and then has another date in there of churches crossing stage stop. I was telling you out on the way earlier, the churches had a stage stop right down the road from where we are. We are now in Westminster, Colorado, Jefferson County, on Old Wadsworth at about 100th. And at about Old Wadsworth and 104th, they had a stage stop called Churches Crossing Stage Stop. And the Churches Crossing Stage Stop was a one-day, it was on the Overland Stage Route. And in the early days, that was a one-day stage ride from Denver to get to here, to Churches Crossing, and then another day to get to Boulder. As the roads, the stage roads got improved, the stage coaches went on past Churches Crossing, but the freight wagons driven by the bullwhackers, that's where that term comes from, those guys continued to use Churches Crossing till the early 1920s. I think it was 1922, 23, 24, somewhere in that range. Stopped because trucks and automobiles and rail and everything was improved, and they didn't need to haul stuff around with oxen pulling freight wagons. We talked about out in the hall that there are a number of deeds that were land grants and other deeds that in those days they were actually signed by presidents. We've got deeds signed by Grover Cleveland, Taft, I'll think of the other names in a minute. I've got a mind block right now. Really getting kind of moving on to the Rocky Flats area. When I was a kid, of course, most of Rocky Flats before 1950-51 was all ranched, farmed, and grazed. We raised hay in Section 13. The ditches are still there. We had two ponds in Section 13 that are fed from Smart Reservoir, which is up in Section 16. When the tree hugging community claims that Rocky Flats is pristine and has never been touched, I mean, they would have you believe that the only one that has ever set foot at Rocky Flats was an Indian, and he was wearing moccasins, and that was 100 years ago. So it kind of is a sore spot with me, as you can tell, that they try to pull one over on the general public and imply that it's tall grass prairie, and that Rocky Flats should be just left that way forever and ever. Seems like we've had decades of ongoing battles at Rocky Flats, legal battles. It's not been a lot of fun. They've not been a great neighbor. They don't play fair. In some ways, it's government at its worst. I don't know if you came here to hear that. I'm just spitting it out. You can edit this out if you want. But we've spent decades and a lot of money trying to hold our own and maintain our position, and we're still doing it. That's why I comment, because right now they want to just shut down all the mineral ownership. The Rocky Flats plant did not want to buy minerals. They did not want to pay for minerals. If they could get them free or sweated out of the land sellers, we were one of the major ones, but we're not the only ones. We have the Lindsay family, the Spicer family, and that map over there has other families that were landholders around Rocky Flats. And maybe at some point in this interview, if you want, I'll go over there and read those off just for the record.
Sure. So what was your family's total acreage before?
At Rocky Flats or everywhere?
Well, everywhere, and then at Rocky Flats as well.
Well, that's a good question. You know, the one thing I haven't said during this conversation is I think I'm doing exactly what our family did for 4 other generations. I guess I'm a 4th generation. Candy's a 5th generation. And what is that? Agricultural, mining, and land development. I've heard economic development directors say that the Churches Crossing stage stop was the first form of economic development in this area. If you think about it, I guess it was. And if you think about how things develop, they usually kind of sort of follow transportation. I mean, in the old days, they followed the stage lines. It's where the stages stopped, and then it was where the railroad stopped. Remember, we watch all these old-time westerns on TV and read Louis L'Amour and other stories, and they talk about towns fighting for the rail to stop there because that would help bring commerce and industry. I'm sure down south they were fighting for the steamships to stop on the rivers. And now we have the interstates, same way. We were just earlier talking about your affiliation with Albuquerque area. I mean, you know, it's I-25 and what, I-40?
Yeah.
And so things happen, especially you have 2 great highways crossing, that's even better. So, I'm doing the same thing. I was kind of forced to do land development because when I came here to do ranching and farming, I I did dry land wheat and made $7,900 in 1 year, and the back end of the tractor went out and cost me $4,500. I was still raising cows, but as you can see, I'd be better off if I worked at Diamond Shamrock. And I could rapidly see that if we didn't make some changes, that I could lose this place just for taxes. So I did have a background in construction and some in development opportunities. So then I started chasing the opportunity for the Church Ranch Boulevard interchange on the Denver-Boulder Turnpike. You can see up on the wall that these are kind of some of the projects that we've done. This is Church Ranch, almost completed. That's a rendering. But we have the hotel in the bottom left is up. It's a Spring Hill Suites by Marriott. We will be building the other Marriott on the right forefront. The tall 4-story building in the back is up. The 2-story building next to that is up, and the other 2 are not. Most of the stuff on the right-hand side is all built, except for one. That L-shaped building is not built yet. The apartments are up and done. You can see these other pictures here. There's another one. These are our single-story stuff that we've done. You may as well swing over to this one. This is the farmer-rancher side of me. That's a detention pond, but we made it detention-retention. We have water rights, old water rights that are on Big Dry Creek. So we detain on the top. The freeboard that you see above the water is where the stormwater goes. So that's detained, and then that leaks out over time, so that basically you detain or slow down the water before, you know, if you had you'd have a domino of water going down, you'd have flood. So detention is a great way to slow down the flows. The retention is the water that you keep all the time. That is actually ditch water or water out of Big Dry Creek. And that water, we do all 100% raw water irrigation here at Church Ranch. And that's interesting, and initially was challenging feature. So basically we took when you drive around, you see these big holes in the ground, dry holes in the ground. And so we have a kind of a, laughingly, we say if we can't make it go away, feature it. So we couldn't make the detention pond go away, so we featured it, and I think it was a good way, but it's kind of the farming and ranching side. I think being a farmer and rancher makes me a better developer. If you're in touch with the land and you're out on the land and you're working the land, you know the land better and you treat the land better. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place here, but do you want to ask me some more questions?
Well, let's go back to the acreage question.
Oh yeah. Answer the question, Charlie. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let's try to answer that for you. The Church family, as near as I can tell, I found records that say 17,000 acres. I found records that say 27,000 acres, and I used to hear 40,000 acres. I don't know what's right. They had land when I was a little boy. They had land that they were homesteading up in Grand Lake, Colorado, Granby, Grand Lake, Grand County. And my Uncle Marcus, which when we get done or at some point in time, I'll grab a picture of him and we should get him in here because he's a key player. But my Uncle Marcus lived up there, and he was finishing out a homestead. He raised lettuce up there. He raised Hereford cattle. He raised hay. If you think about when you go to Granby, that's what you see is hay meadows. But the lettuce was a neat thing. He had a dairy there, and I can remember as a kid, they used to drive the cattle from here to Granby, and they go straight that way over Rollins Pass and right over. And if you've ever driven up Highway 72 and poked your way, you're pretty darn close. You can get pretty darn close to Granby just going on those gravel roads, and that's kind of a fun thing to do once in a while. So I don't know, and answer your question, how many acres. I, for example, lease 5,000 acres for cattle grazing right now. I have, I think we sold 4,000 acres over time for Rocky Flats, so it was a big piece. You know, there was the original sale in 50-51, and then there was the expansion of the buffer zone, which took place in 74, 75 area. That there again, going back to my sore subject, we farmed and ranched that ground till 74, 75. So when the environmental community says that it's all pristine and it was never touched, I mean, you know, 74, 75 was not that long ago. And I like to also say that that Rocky Flats didn't own that ground long enough to screw it up. And it was tough to get to because of the Woman Creek Canyon that is in section 15. So it was real tough for them to get over there and dump anything, which is a good thing. So if I answer your question on acreage?
Yeah, you did. Maybe we can just sort of take this chronologically with the Rocky Flats stuff. And, I don't know if you were around, you probably weren't living in Colorado at the point when they first approached your uncle.
Yeah, I was only 9 years old then.
Right, so do you know the history of how that came about?
Well, there's some interesting pieces that I know. You know, being 9 years old, I don't know all the story, and but I can remember they thought it might be an opportunity. First of all, in the beginning, they didn't want to sell. They wanted to just keep doing what they did. And then they thought, well, maybe it is an opportunity. And then when you start negotiating with the government, my experience with government is that if at all possible, they'll never play fair. So when they started negotiating with the government, it was long and it was tough, and it looked like they'd never make a deal. And so then the final deal was made under threat of condemnation, And so they made their deal with them, and they took the original ground, and they said, I can remember some of the stories with the mineral rights, my Uncle Mark saying, well, you know, gosh, the minerals are worth that much. And they said, well, we don't want the minerals. We don't want the minerals. You can keep the minerals. All we need is the land. And particularly when they did the buffer zone, they said, all we want to do is have this buffer zone around the plant so that we give ourselves some breathing room from our neighbors. Of course, now it's a completely different story. I read in the some of these minutes of the Rocky Flats Coalition of Local Governments and others. I read, and the Department of Wildlife, that the feds are exploring ways that they can legally prevent the landowners from accessing their minerals. Well, does that sound very fair to you? I mean, it doesn't seem right. I mean, they said we could keep the minerals, and then they want to explore ways that they can legally keep us from getting to our minerals. It's to me, it's a bad deal.
Without buying mineral rights.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's their first way is basically if we can screw them out of it, then we won't cost us anything.
What are the minerals that are under there?
There is coal, and a lot of the coal is owned by the UP. Remember your history, how they used to give the every other section to the railroads to build through, and then they would sell everything, but they always keep the minerals. So there's coal, there's gas, there's oil. Gas and oil are usually companions, and there's gravel, sand, clay, rock, and ore. And we have been mining. I can remember again when I think it was like 1946. I can remember being out here, and the clay mine was up there at Rocky Flats in Section 9, which is just, that's what you see when you drive in on the Westgate Road and you stop at the guard shack and you look to the north. That's our clay mine. And there was some other clay mining. Wesley Conda was mining in the school section called Section 16 up there, and then the Spicers also had a clay mine up there. So we mine, we are involved with the mining of gravel, sand, which is a byproduct of the gravel, and clay, and rock. And that rock, Rocky Flats rock, is great rock. It is extremely hard, and there's a deal called the Rattler test, which, if you think about clanking rocks together, hard rocks would clank more. So that's kind of the way they put it in this drum, and they do the Rattler test, and I guess they hit it with BBs or ball bearings or whatever, but they test the hardness. And the other thing about the Rocky Flats gravel is that when it crushes, it has lots of fractured faces, and fractured faces work great for concrete and for blacktop, because you think a lot of faces, so it sticks. So I think I've answered your question on the minerals.
Yeah.
Oh, one other thing that would be helpful, probably, in Section 16, mentally drive into the Rocky Flats plant from Highway 93, stop at the guard shack, look to your right, which would be to the south, and you'll see some mining there. Directly under there was the old Capital Caprock coal mine, and it was shut down in 1957, but that was like 950 feet deep, just adjacent to the Rocky Flats plant. Yeah, we've all heard about the Leyden coal mine in Leyden Gulch, which runs basically from Highway 93 almost back to Indiana. There's the Leyden Road, if you've ever driven that gravel road, Leyden Road, there's all kinds of remnants. I mean, that was a huge, huge coal mine. And we know from our history that Superior, town of Superior was a coal mining town. Louisville had coal mines. So when you mention coal, I mean, I know coal right now is not a big deal, mining coal, but at some point in time it may be. And my point is that there's the presence of coal around. There's been a precedent set there. So at some point in time, coal may be another valuable asset out there.
Okay, so back to 1950.
Yes.
When the discussion of mineral rights came from your, I think it was your uncle saying.
My uncle and my grandmother. My grandmother was still active in the management of the ranch then, but I can remember discussions that they were trying to work out a deal with the folks at Rocky Flats, and then of course even then there was tax consequences. So what would you like me to tell you on that?
Okay, so they sold the land.
They sold the land. They sold the land, and actually under threat of condemnation they were able to trade into other things without having Uncle Sam take up, the tax man take a bite out of you for selling land. So they rolled it right back into other land. In fact, that's where they acquired we call it the Buckman place, which is at 96th in Indiana. They acquired the Buckman place at that time.
So why don't you tell me your first memory of Rocky Flats?
My first memory of Rocky Flats was riding in my grandmother's 46 Ford, four-door sedan, bouncing across Rocky Flats, looking at the cows. And I find myself doing the same thing. I mean, I keep going. As a rancher and a farmer, when you're not doing anything, you just go out and look at your cows, and you look at your fences, and you look at water holes, and you look at grass and grass quality, and wonder how long it's going to hold, and so forth. So I can remember bouncing along in that car with my grandma and my Uncle Mark, and they were talking, and I was just, they just stuck me in the back. And I can remember saying, "Grandma, when are you going to get me down off all these bumps?" So that was a long time ago.
And that was that before the land had been sold, or was that after?
No, I think that was like a few years before.
Okay. And then when did you become aware of this government entity that was your neighbor? Uncle's neighbor.
Well, right after the sale, it was 50-51. The government moved in with their guards and the full force of the United States government, and they, you know, when you're a farmer and a rancher, you put fences on property lines or on section lines, and so you basically know where everything is. You know where section 15 starts and where 15 stops, and 14 and 13, and you know where all these sections are. And they hadn't even gotten their fences up, and my uncle would be out doing things with cattle or running water in irrigation ditches, and the guards would come barreling down on him and try to use their force against him. And 9 times out of 10, I mean, I can remember the big fights and him just telling them that they were just full of shit. They didn't know where they still don't know a lot of things. But in those days, they didn't even know where their property line, I mean, they were trying to kick him off of his own ground because they didn't know where the property lines were. They didn't know where anything was. I can remember him, you know, the old saying, they couldn't find their ass with both hands. But yet they'd use their force against him, and here it was his land, he grew up on it. You know, it was his grandparents had farmed and ranched it, and he'd made a sale, a good faith sale, and they didn't know where things were, where things started and where things stopped. So I can remember, and he was not the type of guy to let somebody push him around. So those are my first memories of Rocky Flats moving in.
What did you know about it in terms of what was going on there?
I didn't know anything. I had no idea.
How about your uncle and grandma?
Well, you know, when I look at the old newspaper clippings, I think that, you know, in general, I think wasn't it Governor Love that was around in those days? I think in general everybody thought that the Rocky Flats plant was going to be a great thing. Economically, it probably was. I'll take it back. I'll scratch probably. It was. Economically, it contributed a huge economic base to this quadrant. Likewise, it killed any opportunity for development in this area. I mean, fly over it today. Fly into Denver, and you're coming over the tech center, and you're going over, you know, over Golden, and you're going I-70 and I-25, and you're seeing all this stuff, and now all of a sudden it just gets black, except for the gold lights at Rocky Flats. I was down on Parker Road in Arapahoe yesterday. I don't know if you've been down there. I mean, it's amazing. I thought to myself, you know, the Rocky Flats, because the Rocky Flats area never got its opportunity to have any development they would have gotten went south or it went east. But it didn't ever have, it went to Boulder. Boulder was far enough away. But Boulder had the economic base of the college. So I'm rambling again.
No. Good stuff. When did you or when did your uncle first become aware of that there were issues that were going to continue to affect your land after you sold it?
Well, there were always the ongoing irritations that happened with the Rocky Flats plant. I can remember, and you know, I can remember them, you know, up until recently, it was never popular to have prairie dogs. I don't know if you could see how prairie dogs decimate, absolutely ruin the ground. And in those days, the United States government used to make it a requirement of leases, of government grazing leases, that you kill so many thousand prairie dogs every year. And they would give you the prairie dog poison or the poison oats. And so what did the Rocky Flats plant do? They imported. They decided, well, we're going to be great neighbors, and we're going to appeal to the environmental community. So we're going to import prairie dogs. They imported prairie dogs, and I think hired a fence contractor to go out with a post hole digger and dig them holes and drop them into the holes and put chicken wire over the top so that they would be there. And of course, they immediately left that area and ran all over to our side of the fence. So there were always those kinds of things, always the guards hassling. Guards, up until a few years ago, continued to hassle. I mean, they would hassle me, and I guess they didn't have enough to do, so first thing you know, there'd be Rambo peering over the fence, laying on his stomach with binoculars, watching me feed hay to calves and cows. So those are my early recollections. From there, what was it? They had the oil in the drums, where they took the plutonium contaminated oil, and they went out and thought it was a great idea to just buy a bunch of used drums. It was probably before the days of pallets even. And they just stuck all the drums out behind the building, and pretty soon they were out in the rain and the snow, and the drums deteriorated and dripped oil, and the oil went all down into Walnut Creek, and the wind blew, and first thing you know, it was contaminating creeks. And I can remember the Walnut Creek subdivision at 108th and Sims. There was another rancher by the name of Tom Bonar, by the Bonar family. He, and actually we own that ground now. We call it Great Western Park, which is this project up here. He lost that ground because of Rocky Flats. Then there was the 61 fire, when they burned out all the filters, and then of course then there was just so I became aware of it just like everybody else did when Uncle Mark would. Now remember, I'm living in Evanston, Illinois, and my mom was really a partner in the ranch. I was just a grandkid, and so I'd get these copies of these newspaper articles talking about the problems. And Rocky Flats has been in the press ever since. Mm-hmm. They're not quite in the press as much. I mean, I think Rocky Flats was contaminated more by perception than by reality, because they just got pounded on by the press, and I think it was deserved. I think that they, in my opinion, they just mishandled, and they still mishandle stuff. That's my opinion. I've got some great people I've worked with at Rocky Flats, some guys that have been great and fair with me, but I've also had some just terrible experiences there. Just on the West Spray Field, for example, I spent 10 or 11, 12 years, went through 8 or 9 managers of the for the Rocky Flats plant. I went through 15 attorneys. I was there. I'd already been working on it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years when Steve Sheeswohl first came on board, and hell, we'll probably both watch each other retire. That West Spray Field was a real nightmare. Now I'm fighting the new battle of the acquiring the minerals. I mean, it's been one legal battle after another.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about the history of the West Spray Field? I don't.
Sure. The West Spray Field is in Section 9. It's right where the gravel is. Again, drive in your mind off of Highway 93, and Section 9 is at the is at the northeast corner of Highway 93 and the Westgate Road. So I have that strip of ground there I call it Mountain Plains Industrial Center, and then there's the gravel operation. Just past that a little bit is 94 acres of ground that Rocky Flats decided it would be a good way to get rid of their effluent, their sewage water, by spraying it on the ground. This is treated sewage, so that means it's kind of halfway back where it needs to be. Now that's not a bad idea to do that. I mean, if you go out and if you go on a vacation, you go to small towns, you see them off of interstates, a lot of them get rid of their water that way. Most of them, though, plant a crop which consumes the nitrogen and turns it into good grass or alfalfa or something else. In their case, here was all up at Rocky Flats. They didn't do any of those things. They just kept pouring it to it and pouring it to it. And all of a sudden, the nitrates got extremely high there. And during that time, the health department changed the nitrate standards to half or double, whichever way you want to look at it, what they normally were. So all of a sudden, nitrates were an issue. Well, then we have and so here I am trying to get my gravel permit sorted out, and I go through so many people. Pat Courier, the chief counsel for the DOE, assured me there was absolutely no contamination problems whatsoever, assured me that he'd take care of it, and that's where I went through all the 8 or 9 managers and 15 or so attorneys, and people came and went, and I'm still fighting it and still trying to get issues resolved. And then they have the FBI raid. The FBI raid comes in, and all of a sudden everything becomes a Superfund site. But they camouflage. Well, they didn't camouflage. They understand what RCRA and CERCLA mean. I mean, I'm a rancher. I'm a land developer. I don't understand. At that time, I didn't understand what RCRA or CERCLA site meant. But basically what happened is in Section 9, our zoned, permitted, and leased gravel became a Superfund site. So all of a sudden now we have Jefferson County, rightly so, when they hear, oh my God, we've permitted a Superfund site at Rocky Flats and Charlie McKay wants to mine gravel out there, or is mining gravel out there, well, they knee-jerked and about had a fit. And so they jerked our permit, and I said, wait a minute, they were going to take all the mining away. And I'm going to put this down for a minute, and I'll hold up another map that will be interesting for you. I just have to turn around, and then I'll clip this on. I hope I'll get it right. Okay. Okay, are you ready to go?
Yep.
Hopefully it won't get too much glare. You're welcome to change those blinds back there, but maybe we need the light. Okay. This is Highway 93. Here's the Rocky Flats plant, and I hope this glare isn't screwing up your deal. Here's where the guard shack is. Here's our operation for good idea. Here's our clay and gravel operation. Here's the West Spray Field. Actually, the West Spray Field, it's west of Rocky Flats, but it's east of our gravel operation. So the West Spray Field is east of our gravel operation. It's 94 acres. You can even see, if you look closely, you can see the water marks from when they put the irrigation, used irrigation to get rid of their effluent. I basically had to go back to them, and they were going to pull all of this mining. Jefferson County was, and I pleaded with them. And I said, let's put this on ice or on the back burner until I can prove to you that it is not contaminated. And they agreed to do that, and that was great. Proving to them and even getting help from anybody at Rocky Flats was absolutely impossible. We were still, actually Jefferson County was mining some of this ground here, and when they opened up this strip here, this little strip here, I get a call from Rocky Flats safety officer. This is the same stuff that I talked about. They said, "You're mining in the West Brayfield." I said, "No, we're not mining in the West Brayfield." I went out there and had kind of a shouting match with them, but they pulled Jefferson County in to the deal. And they said, "You're mining in the West Brayfield. It's extremely dangerous. If you have set foot in the West Brayfield, if any of your equipment, it is going to have to be tested. You're going to have to be tested."
For plutonium?
For plutonium, americium, all these other metals that it turned out came from these ponds. They said that there's other stuff that was in the water other than the nitrates. And I know, no wonder you asked that question, because I was talking nitrates only. So basically, they ran off. They ran off Jefferson County. They scared the living shit out of them. And they didn't even know where the line was. I had to show them aerial photographs and show them marks and tell them that, no, we're over here, we're on this side. The West Brayfield line is here. But they're over here telling me that we're in the West Brayfield, and they didn't even know where they were. This is the safety officers. This is a number of the supposed hitters at Rocky Flats. So it's just more bumbling, in my opinion, not knowing what in the hell they're doing. And so they ran off my tenant.
So is this your land, or is this Rocky Flats land, or is it someone else's land that you have rights?
We own, remember earlier in the story, I told you we retain the mineral rights?
Right.
And so this is where we retain mineral rights. This ground wasn't until 74, 75, this acquisition here, and this stuff over here.
So that's part of the buffer?
Yeah, buffer zone, yeah. And this is buffer zone. This is section 15, 14, and 13.
Okay, so when they bought
the surface
part of the land,
yes,
and the rest of that, you still retain the mineral rights, and they said you could mine it. It wasn't completely closed off.
No, they said we could mine. Yeah, that was our deal. You know, which they tried to also wiggle out of by saying, well, you can mine it, but you have to process it somewhere else. So they wanted us to mine it and then haul it over to Commerce City and process it over there, but we were able to prove that the wording in there permitted processing.
So that they wanted you to process it over there for security concerns, or?
No, they just wanted to screw with us as much as they could. Yeah, it's exactly right.
They didn't say.
Well, that's the way government works. These people are going to love hearing that, but that's the truth. That's the way government works. It's no different than going to the DMV or the post office and have somebody, you wait in line for 15 minutes and he says, I'm going to lunch, you're going to have to go over there. It's no different than going to get your driver's license and having some surly government person make you feel like you don't even belong there. It's no different. It's no different. It's that way at Rocky Flats. I'll tell you another thing. When I finally went to court to do depositions on this, Rockwell was the one that originally was involved in when this happened. I start giving testimony, and I'll kind of fast forward on this, but I started giving testimony, and Rockwell said, well, Mr. McKay, this was after the second day of testimony, they said, well, Mr. McKay, we have a letter here that you wrote to your brother, and you familiar with this? Take a look at it, Mr. McKay. Is that your letterhead? Yes. What's the date on that letter, Mr. McKay? And I gave the date. And they said, okay, well, you might want to read it over and familiarize yourself with the letter, Mr. McKay. And I said, okay. And did you write the letter? Yes. Is that your signature at the bottom? Yes. Well, Mr. McKay, what does it say in there in the third paragraph? You're talking to your brother and you're saying that you don't trust Rocky Flats and you think they may be lying to you? And I said yes. And they said, we're out. We passed the statute of limitations. You see, you knew effective this date that you knew or should have known, there's a thing in law, you knew or should have known that we were lying to you, so we're out. Now, does that sound like fair play?
No.
No. Well, that's the way they deal. That's exactly the way they deal. And they'll deal that way today. Does it sound like they're good neighbors?
No.
Does it sound like they're fair people?
They're the government.
Yeah, they're the government. So?
I'm trying to decide where to go from here. You had also mentioned your current wrangling about the mineral rights. Maybe we'll save that for later.
Okay.
But I want to get to that.
Okay.
Why don't we talk about, you talked about, was your first lawsuit involving Rocky Flats over the buffer zone, or was there previous litigation?
No. I was telling you, I'm thinking about all the comments that I just made, and I hope you don't run out to Rocky Flats and show this to all those people and they don't use it against me, because they would. They would just say, well, the son of a bitch is crazy, let's just screw him some more. They would. And maybe I am. So where are we? You asked about the...
I just wanted to sort of go through the history, since these interviews will be for people who, like myself, who aren't very familiar with the history, sort of to start from square one, and maybe we can talk about the history of your litigation.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, well, here's how it came down. Remember I was telling you that all of a sudden I start getting in the paper, we hear about the oil drums that were leaking into Walnut Creek. We hear about the 61 fire where they burned out all the filter banks. And then there was various people with the health department that got involved. And they were, there was just all kinds of Dr. Carl Johnson talking about all this contamination at Rocky Flats and how terrible it is, and was, well, there was a sale at this is the Rocky Flats plant. Here's the Eastgate Road, and here's Indiana. There was a sale right in here, right around Mauer Reservoir, to a guy by the name of Ken Good. Ken Good was a big-time developer in Colorado, and we sold it to him with my Uncle Mark and my mother did, because I'm still young. Sold it to him with full disclosure about the Rocky Flats plant, full awareness and full disclosure. And he was going to do a housing tract there. And it was turned down by the city of Westminster and others, basically because of Rocky Flats and all this contamination. The lenders wouldn't lend. They foreclosed on the Walnut Creek subdivision way over on 108th and Sims. And so all that happened. And we had to foreclose on Ken Good, who we'd already sold the ground to, because he refused to make the payments. Well, when we foreclosed on him, he cross-sued us because of Rocky Flats, and indicated that somehow or other, even though with full disclosure, that it was an unfair sale, and he sued us back. And it was right about that time that Jefferson County and the state of Colorado put this big circle around the Rocky Flats plant, which went all the way to Sims. You can drive out Sims today and see the development stop right at Sims. You can see it right today if you're familiar with this area. And it says no building permits will be issued. They also called it the yellow zone. Well, I mean, all of a sudden, so basically we got our land, it was a taking without paying us any money. They just basically said, well, I guess you can keep grazing it. They even made some comments that the church ranch cattle glowed in the dark because it was, you know, next to the Rocky Flats plant, which was untrue, but that was the allegations. You know, if you ate the meat from the church ranch cattle next to the Rocky Flats plant, your children might have 2 heads, and I mean, it was just all kinds of craziness. So it was right about that time that Uncle Mark said, no, that's enough. We're going to sue them. Basically because they took our land and they didn't pay for it. So there was Judge Mach, who was a very fine judge, and you know, he's caught in between a rock and a hard place. I mean, he works for the feds, and now we're suing the feds. And he's trying to, you know, figure out what's fair and what's not fair, and you know, there's always the argument for the benefit or the public safety of the whole United States that certain rules are going to be broken. So, well, that's all may be true, but you know, why should the church family and why should the other landowners around there stand the brunt of it? So at any rate, we sued them. It went on for 8 years. The government, you know, with the power of government, they've got endless cash flow from taxes. They can just delay you and delay you and delay you and delay you and delay you, and I could say delay till 7 o'clock tonight. They use every legal tactic to just burn up whatever, just cause the ones that were suing them, just cause us to burn up, you know, $1 million in legal fees. And when Uncle Mark died in '79, I was here, and he had not been doing well, and we talked about a number of things. But the Rocky Flats lawsuit was something that he wanted me to keep, you know, hang on to, and ought to keep fighting for it.
What were you seeking? Were you seeking payment or to be able to develop the land?
Yes. We were seeking whatever. I think it was for a huge, you know, millions of dollars. Because, as you know, you start out with millions of dollars and then you hopefully get back to something that's reality.
Right.
It was multi-million, I forget what, $38 million or something, which was a lot of money back then. So Uncle Mark died, and I started coming here more and more often. I met with Fairfield and Woods.
Who were Fairfield and Woods?
Oh, Fairfield and Woods was our attorneys. He's the attorneys. My family did business with them for 50 years. And so I met with them, and I met with Howard Holm, who was the lead guy, younger than me even, at that time. And he was the guy that was the lead guy for the lawsuit. And he was a very good technocrat, and he had assembled all this information on plutonium, and we'd hired scientists. You know, we have to hire our scientists, and they had their scientists, and you know, again, you know, you can't trust what they tell you anyway, and so now you have to hire scientists to prove or disprove what they say is true, and then you have the problem that it's a perception more than reality. So all these things were happening, but I said, but why can't we get, you know, because why can't we just pull a building permit? Who's keeping us from having a building permit? He said, well, the state of Colorado and Jefferson County. This is what Howard Holm told me. And I said, well, I'd like to get this thing to a place of settlement. And I said, we can go to court. If they want to go to court, we'll melt down everything that we have and go to court with them. How's your time on that thing?
Pretty much run out. So,
yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. So is this a good place to stop?
Sure.
'Cause, we have some minutes to play with, but I like to. August 6th, you
Yeah.
can say August 8th.
Mhm.
And we were discussing, Charlie McKay and Hannah Nordhaus were discussing the first lawsuit.
Yes.
And you were saying that you were ready to settle, I think. So
No, no.
so you
What
were-
I said was I would come here. First of all, I was living in Fallbrook, California at that time. Fallbrook, California is in North San Diego County, kind of in the Escondido, Oceanside area. Fallbrook is the avocado capital of the world, which it's a beautiful place. And I was doing some land development there. I was doing historic restoration there. I was minor subdivisions, construction, whatever I could do to scratch out a living. And one of the things I did was I remodeled a 104-year-old building and made it into a restaurant. And it was during that time that a year after Uncle Mark died, that I had to foreclose on this building that I remodeled and built into a restaurant. And so I had no restaurant experience. I had to take it over. It was at a time when there was 25%, it cost 25% money on second trust deeds. Our economy in the early 80s just went upside down. And if I didn't take that thing over, I would have lost it. And then I had signed personally on stuff so they could have attacked and taken everything. So I moved into that restaurant and took it over and worked 130 hours a week for 3 years. But I would come to Colorado as much as I could, like every couple months, and spend a day or two with Howard, come in here, rent a car, boom, 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 try to handle the stuff at the ranch. It was during that time that the bank thought maybe it would be a good idea to line up all the farm and ranch equipment and sell it and sell all the cows and rent everything out, which is maybe from an absentee owner's standpoint is probably a sensible idea. But I kind of felt like there's 4 generations had worked their butts off for Church Ranch, and why should we, the McKay boys, come in and melt it all down for cash and go sit on the beach? So I said, no, we don't want to do it. We want to keep it going just like it did. And so I'd meet with Howard. I know I'm drifted off here. You're probably wondering. So I meet with Howard, and I say to Howard, haven't they ever talked about settlement? Are we going to just go to court and just, spend another 10 years and go to court? He said, well, they have mentioned it a few times. And I said, well, let's go back on the problem of no building permits, because I'm a developer. I said, well, what if we could just get something going out at Rocky Flats, maybe get some projects going, we could get other projects going. He said, well, you can't get a building permit. Why not? Jefferson County won't let us do it, and neither will state of Colorado. I said, good, sue them too. And I said, only for this reason. I said, I think if we bring enough pressure to Jefferson County, to the state of Colorado, and to the feds, the DOE and so forth, we can they'll put pressure on the DOE and we can sit down and talk. That's all we need to do, because we're not talking. During the West Sprayfield deal, I had to go to a public meeting, a public hearing, and I got information on the West Sprayfield. When I went to the DOE and get it, they wouldn't even give it to me. I mean, that's just that's their deal. We ain't talking about anything. They don't let very many people write letters at DOE. Why? Because they might make a mistake. So apparently they don't trust their employees, so they just don't let them write letters. Every letter that goes out has to be gone over by an attorney. So I said, well, good. Well, maybe if we could sue Jefferson County and the state of Colorado, maybe we can bring enough pressure to bear that we're going to sit down and settle this thing. So lo and behold, he gets a call, and they said, yeah, we would consider settling. And so we went. and we had it was a federally supervised court settlement, supervised. Judge Maich appointed Sherman Feinsilver, Judge Sherman Feinsilver, nicest guy in the world. He is the sweetest, nicest guy in the world, but he's a good settlement judge because he'll pound on this side and he'll pound on that side. He'll just go back and forth and pound. You know, he'll wear the two down so that he brings them closer and closer together. So we started meeting and we started talking, and I remember the first meeting, it was like 38 attorneys, and my brother was there for the first few meetings. It was like 38. I mean, they had Dow Chemical attorneys, they had Rockwell attorneys, they had State of Colorado attorneys, Jefferson County attorneys. I think I said, no, Rockwell wasn't involved. Yeah, Rockwell was involved. Rockwell was there, DOE. It was like 38 attorneys and Howard Holm and me and my brother. And then my brother said, man, that place is a hot box. You go ahead and keep working with him. And he went back to California. And so we worked and we worked and we worked and we worked, and we finally got it settled. And part of what we got money. We got some money. Not a lot of money. And really, when you think about it, it wasn't a lot of money. Our share was like $6.75 million. We'd already spent $1 million in legal. But what we got, in my opinion, which was more important, was we got the curtain lifted off of the ability to develop that property. We got a certification from the Colorado Department of Health, a nice guy by the name of Al Hazel, who was very involved, and he has maintained from day one. He said that ground out there is just plain old Colorado dirt. It's no different. The stuff on our properties. There was some stuff that was over here. If you think about it, this is downwind. The stuff that is easterly of Indiana, there were some hot spots there. So what we agreed to do was they gave me, I thought $50,000 was enough money, but it turned out it wasn't. But it was still good to have it for to hire planners and engineers, because I said, let's test it with Jefferson County. If it's clean, clear, and acceptable for development, let's test it. So we did a piece here. This is 96 in Indiana right here, and we owned 158 acres. This piece up here at the west gate to the Rocky Flats plant, fronting on Highway 93, on the north side of the Westgate Road, was the other piece. And so I said, let's process both of those through Jefferson County and see what happens. So over time, and I said, then when we get our permits, our deal's done and we can have a closing. So I did. We processed them through Jefferson County, and it was difficult, but they never once used the Rocky Flats deal. You know, they had been told, I'm sure, by the commissioners and others, look, because Jefferson County was a party to this settlement agreement, they had said, don't you dare be using Rocky Flats as a reason to not let these folks develop, because we've already told them it's safe to develop. So that was a good thing. And my thinking was, if we got an okay on this and an okay on that, everything in between ought. I mean, you couldn't process 1,500 acres, but you could process 158 and 150. And basically what I did is, in the meantime, they had said, I remember Jack McNett, he was the attorney for Rockwell, he had said, along with Jake Chavez, the attorney for the DOE out of Albuquerque, they said, Your Honor, we want to help these people. We're sorry this happened. You know, Your Honor, we want to help these neighbors. We'll do anything we can. In fact, Your Honor, we have a number of opportunities the DOE, you know, the DOE right now has a need for a pipe shop and a carpenter shop, and we have a need for a engineering building, and we have a need for this, and we have a need for that. And so, and we would love to work with McKay's, and gee, maybe we could put those facilities out there. And but after they'd agreed to it, it was a tough deal to get an actual agreement. You know, they were going to use their best efforts, and they did. To their credit, they did. 27 months later, we had a lease. And to their credit, they also gave us water to that site. Those two buildings that you see at the corner of when you enter Rocky Flats from Highway 93, those two buildings we built for the DOE, for Rockwell to move into as a result of that lawsuit. And they agreed to deliver us water, 20,000 gallons of water a day for 40 years. Which they're also right now trying to wiggle out of that one too. It's just more of the same old shit.
Let me ask you, I guess Leroy Moore, Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, mentioned that that first lawsuit.
Yeah, see that peace pole up there, up on the top? Do you see it on the far right-hand corner?
Eleanor, that one.
Yeah, I'll go get it, and we'll just put it here, and you can, if you want to ask about Leroy Moore. Go ahead, you ask and keep talking.
Okay, I was just asking if he felt that the first lawsuit with Howard Home really opened everybody's eyes to what was going on in Rocky Flats. And a lot of the information was made available to the public as a consequence of that lawsuit. I was wondering if, you know, in terms of getting information from Rocky Flats, did that open the doors for you in terms of?
You know, remember when you go to a settlement conference, this, by the way, this says, in English it says, oh, I'll get my glasses on here. This was a peace pole that was erected out at Rocky Flats on my property. Rocky Flats wouldn't even let them erect this, so, but I had to do it. It says, "May peace prevail on earth." And it says it in 4 different languages. This looks like French, or maybe it's Spanish. Que la paix en la tierra.
That's Spanish.
That's Spanish, yeah. This must be Japanese or Chinese. And hell, I can't even tell which is up. I don't know what this one is. But at any rate, we erected there. I allowed those guys to erect that out on Highway 93, and then somebody else came along and just tore it down. I mean, it's our world is funny, isn't it? That I mean, a thing like that should not have been torn down by somebody. So you got to remember, this was a settlement conference. So at a settlement conference, you really want to talk about settlement. You don't want to be, you know, we had our stacks of stuff that we were going to use against them, and they had their stacks of stuff to say that the stuff we had wasn't true. And, you know, remember, we all watched my cousin Vinny. You have to trade, you know, you have to trade. And so they knew what we had and we knew what they had. But the idea was not to try the case, was to try to settle it. So when we got it all settled, basically, I think as a part of it, they just agreed to seal all those records. We gave everything we had back, and so, yeah, I mean, he's right. It did a lot to bring a lot of that stuff out. But we were not there. We were not there to try the case. We were not there to throw more stones at Rocky Flats. We were there to settle a case. That's why they came to the table. That's why we came. So to start trying to try the case, that would have been counterproductive. Yeah. You know, it would have been. But you remember, you didn't. You know how that goes. We've all had arguments like that in our own personal lives that don't go anywhere. We get to vent a lot, but we don't get anywhere. We make the other side madder at us than they already are. So we didn't talk much about pico curies or any of that stuff.
Okay. So this was not the only lawsuit, or was it?
Well, this was the first lawsuit. The second one, I was forced to do. Here's another deal. On this West Spray field, I'm trying to get this thing. All I wanted was my permit to mine the gravel to begin with, and we couldn't get Rocky Flats to move off the dime. And I remember there was a gal by the name of Mindy Brown who was in the legal department, and I ran into her 2 or 3 different times, 2 or 3 different places, and one of the last places I ran into her was at Western Aggregates, who is they were the operator. Okay, you got the Rocky Flats bar across the street, you got the big cement towers. It used to be the Idealite plant in the olden days. And Western Aggregates, they were the kind of the pioneers who came in there and started doing the lightweight and the alluvial. That's the Rocky Flats stuff. I was up there helping Western Aggregates, and Mindy Brown was there, and I started chewing on her as to why is it taking so long for the government to get off their butts and get me some help on the permit and mineability for the West Spray field. I was in the middle of starting a deal. I was actually way down the line with Western Aggregates on doing a gravel lease. And I said, Mindy, when in the hell are you guys ever getting? I said, you guys keep promising me and promising me and promising me. I've been through so many retirees. Why don't you guys play fair? God darn it. And I started, ranting and raving, as you've seen how I can do earlier in this interview. And she said, let me tell you something, Charlie. We're never going to help you. Quite honestly, it ain't never going to happen. The only way you're ever going to get justice out of us is to sue us. And I said, sue you? I said, that's real nice. I said, I spend all this time and now I'm your neighbor and the only way we're going to get things settled is for me to sue you? I'm supposed to sue you? And she said, no, wait a minute. You're taking it out of context. What I'm telling you is if you sue us, we can bring in the context of settlement, I can bring the right players to the table to work this out with you. See, you can bring the pressure on to the DOE by suing us. So I said, that's what you want? And they said, yeah. So I sued them, and of course it became adversarial just like that. And it's as and was adversarial for years. I mean, I went to the Hall of Justice in Washington, D.C., where you got Abraham Lincoln, statue of Abraham Lincoln as tall as a 2-story building, talking about the justice to the same arm of justice must apply to government as it does to everybody else. But I didn't get any justice. So that was the second lawsuit. We settled that. We got a little money. Probably got back what we had put out in legal fees to fight them. But there again, I was able to get my permit back, and that's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to get our permit back. They did a study called OU11. That was the study that I got at a public hearing, but when I wanted other copies, no way were they going to give me copies. When I got other information, no way were they going to give it to me. They would. I mean, it's just they're the oddest bunch of people.
So what was OU11?
OU11 is the West Spray field.
Okay.
It's the technical name for OU11, and the study is like that thick. Okay. And if you don't have it, you should have that for your museum. If you don't have it, you can you can borrow mine and take it to Kinko's and make a copy. It would be, you really need to have that one.
And so OU11 said that there was no
danger, and that you could raise a family of 4 for 40 years. You could put a subdivision out on this ground, the West Sprayfield ground, and live there for 40 years and not have a problem with contamination, which is a good thing. I mean, at least I was able to, then I had to take that and go to Jefferson County Board of Adjustments, hire an attorney, my brother and I was able to get back our permit.
Okay, so are there more lawsuits?
I think that those are the only 2, unless we have to sue over being able to. If they could take, if you know, now we've got the Department of Wildlife that says, we're taking over. Mining of gravel is incompatible with a wildlife sanctuary, so get rid of these mining guys.
Who's supposed to get rid of you, DOE?
No, Department of Wildlife, because DOWC, which is Department of Interior, right?
Right.
They're going to be taking over the whole Rocky Flats plant.
Right.
So I went to everybody and I said, look, we've got all these, way up at the west end on Highway 93, we've got all this gravel that's being mined and been mined for 40 years or more. Leave that stuff alone, let it be mined out, and go after all the other minerals that are in all this other area. Those are non-permitted, they're not zoned, they take time, and there's fewer interested parties. For the amount of money you would spend on buying out this, for half the money you'd spend on buying out the gravel up there, where you have Lafarge working, you have Lakewood Brick, who's been mining the gravel, the clay for 30 years, you've got Centennial Aggregates, you've got Central Ready Mix, you've got the Spicer Pit, the McKay Pit, the Church Pit, you've got all those up there. Leave those alone and acquire all these other minerals. So what do? They've got a deal now that they want to use the Trust for Public Lands. They've got a bill out right now, the Trust for Public Lands, and basically they want to start by taking away the mining on Highway 93. My thought is that since you have Lafarge, Lakewood Brick, Centennial, and all these companies, I mean, that's like 1,000 jobs. The trickle-down effect. Trickle-down effect is probably more than 1,000 jobs. You know, these are contracts they built. Lafarge, I think, there's like an $11 million plant out there. I know that Centennial Aggregates must have a $2 million plant out there. Tom Murray and Lakewood Brick and his dad, Jim Murray, have built a whole business based on that clay out there, the colors and everything. So now you're just going to take away the clay? I mean, you know, the cost of doing that and the net effect or the gross effect is terrible. Mm-hmm. Leave that alone, but let's talk about how could we mine that and finish that up so that it would be a productive addition to a wildlife sanctuary. If you think about it, Sloan's Lake, you know where that is? Sloan's Lake was an old gravel pit. There's old gravel pits that were reclaimed and make a wonderful addition to our economy and to our society. And so you could reclaim those pits as reservoirs. You know, that's elevation 6,200 feet. You could store water up there. Water storage is compatible with wildlife and with people, with open space. I mean, all that stuff works, in my opinion. What do I know, though? So.
So, what would you like to see happen to that land? Other than what you just described. I mean, would you like to see parts of it developed, or?
You know, they have a whole bunch of, you've probably seen that 4 or 5 page kind of green and white pamphlet. Have you seen that one? That talks about, well, they talk about various scenarios for the development of these are kind of DOW, Department of Wildlife, or Department of Interior. They've talked about a whole bunch of scenarios. Personally, I'd like to see trails around it. You know, if there's hot areas, which there probably are, they need to be capped and covered, or, you know, ground up or hauled off or whatever, so that, you know, you wouldn't want to intentionally allow people to have contact with something that would hurt them. But yeah, I'd like to see trails, and I'd love to see the wildlife. I'm a rancher. Right. I'm all for wildlife. I'm all for grass. Don't get me started again talking about tall grass prairie. I mean, that's what they're trying to say. It's tall grass prairie out there, so we shouldn't mine, and it's pristine. Remember I told you about the only walked on by an Indian, and that was 1,000 years ago, and he was wearing moccasins. It's not that way out there. It has been impacted by Rocky Flats, by public service, power lines, gas lines, by our ranching and farming, by Spicer's ranching and farming. If you want, I'll take this thing off a minute and get this map and just read off these names of these different families.
Do you want me to move
No,
the camera?
you don't have to do anything. I'll go take my pocket knife out and fish this thing out. Okay, I'm going to read to you just so that you get a feeling for the number of different families, and since this is more of a historical record as much as anything for your museum. I'm starting in the upper north. This map, by the way, was prepared for Rocky Flats by the Army Corps of Engineers in Omaha when I was trying to settle or figure out a way that I could finally clean up something on the West Sprayfield. This was like 15 years ago, because DOE didn't know what they owned and what they didn't own out there, if you can believe that. They didn't know whether they owned the minerals or not. So the Army Corps of Engineers did this. We've all been relying on this map. And I was told by letter from Steve Sheeswell, probably written by an attorney, that that even though the Army Corps of Engineers did it and it took 2 years to do, that it was unreliable.
Of course. Okay.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of read it off to you here. I'll try to not to have this take a lot of time, but there are a lot of names that you'll recognize here. The T.N. Jordan Jr., I don't know who he is. Rocky Mountain Fuel, I think that's a division of the Union Pacific Railroad. Harold W. Spicer et al., and the UP Railroad. So within one section you might have one family that owns coal, and more likely the UP would own the coal and the family would own all the other minerals. Eberharder, that's another old family name from Boulder County. UP Railroad Coal. Marcus F. Church, all minerals. That's the section 9 that I've been talking about.
So that's all the minerals and coal, or besides coal?
Well, it says all minerals, but then it says UP Railroad owns the coal, so it probably means all except for. And then there's this little sliver, it says U.S. government owns the minerals, all the minerals except for the coal. UP owns the coal. Now going back up to the top at the north end up near Boulder County, Harold W. Spicer, and incidentally he just died like a few months ago, but I guess his daughters are Boulder folks and they're still around Boulder. Martha Eberharder et al., so that's a family trust probably, all minerals. George W. Lindsay, you've heard of his name. He's the Lindsay Ranch. You've seen pictures of the Lindsay Ranch. You've probably been there, haven't you?
Haven't been there, but I've heard a lot about it.
It's neat. there's another example. If they want to save it, why wouldn't they pay some carpenter contractor to at least drive a few nails in there so that it doesn't fall down?
Well, I think they're just raise funds to restore it.
So, well, that's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Happen.
That's good. Hopefully they'll get it done in our lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
Reamer et al., so that's a family. Catherine E. Church, of course, that's my grandmother. Coal, oil, and gas, Catherine E. Church. UP Railroad, U.S. government owns the ore. Marcus F. Church, all minerals. This is way over in 15. Going back up to the top. Andrew M. Patton et al., all minerals. Union Pacific, coal. Lindsay. Reamer Patton et al. Andrew M. Patton. So I don't know, maybe Patton and Reamer. I'm not quite sure whether that's a marriage deal or maybe a deal like Church McKay, where now the McKays are handling the church deal. Union Pacific Railroad, coal, oil, gas. Adolph Coors, oil, coal, and gas. U.S. government. Catherine E. Church, Department, DOM Acres. I don't know who that is. UP Coal. Here we are. I'm way now over in the north east corner. U.S. government, all minerals. UP Coal, UP Railroad Coal. E.L. McGeorge et al. Oil, gas, and coal. U.S. government owns coal. Ann T. Straub, all minerals. H. Saul Corspnm, as in Mary, SKY, Kermensky et al. And my attorney knows him, the guy that I've had to hire to keep from just getting all the, you'd always come up with a bill that says that they want to acquire all the minerals at Rocky Flats. They want to use their own method of appraisal. You know what that says to me? That they want to appraise it their way so they can screw the landowner. That's what that says to me. And they want, you know what they want to pay us with? They want to give us coupons instead of money. And then we're able to take these coupons and buy drilling rights on the continental shelf. You know where that is? That's out in the middle of the ocean. Now, what's rancher farmer McKay going to do with drilling rights out in the middle of the ocean? That's, sell them?
Yeah.
I'm sure I could make a real killing on them.
Yeah.
Kerpansky, Marcus F. Church, all minerals in 13. The UP owns the coal, and then there's a little corner, Glenn Young, who we bought their ground right next to it. So
that's all. That's just mineral rights, right? And that's all on the Rocky Flats land.
All on the Rocky Flats land.
This is sort of a strange question, but do you think I'm wondering how. I mean, you've told me a bit about how it affected your business. Do you think that your company would have, or your family's business would have taken a different trajectory if you had been 30 miles down the road from Rocky Flats?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, look at Boulder.
Right.
Look at Golden.
So just more development, more housing.
Sure. 30 miles down the road. How far is Denver? Not even 30 miles.
30 miles, so.
I mean,
Parker.
Parker. Yeah. I mean, gosh, you see the tech center. I mean, just go to I-70 and like Indiana, where the all that development, the Stevenson developments. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Thornton, North Glen is less than 30 miles from Rocky Flats.
So you've done you have done developments. It's been mostly business, or how is it? Was it slower to get started, or
out there?
I mean, you've done this, or you're planning this large development, right? But
well, this is this development, which is right here at Wadsworth in Westminster, Colorado, Wadsworth and 100th.
Okay, but out there, it's just gravel. That's all you can do, or
oh no! We're going to get it developed. This map that you see right here is a map of the Beltway that's going to be coming through there.
All right, the Northwest
The 470 Northwest Parkway. Oh, you got the right names. You got it better than I did. But that'll be coming right through there. They'll be coming down Indiana.
Right.
It'll probably go right through the property that I've talked to you earlier today about at 96 in Indiana. That'll come right down. This is Indiana. North is at the top. It's going to come and sweep right through and go over the Leiden mine. And that will make a huge difference. We are working with the city of Arvada and have been since this map here is a comprehensive development plan that was done with the city of Arvada and Jefferson County, and that was signed off in '89. You've heard of Jefferson Center. Nothing's happened.
Right.
But things will finally happen, and I think it's a great thing. The Rocky Flats area is finally going to have its birthday. You know, the tear down of the buildings and the fact that, you know, there's less and less negative press coming out of Rocky Flats, that's all good stuff. I think it's fine that it's going to be preserved as open space.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for open space, just don't take my ground
Right.
to make open space.
Do you, did you have any concerns on your property about contamination, you know, your living property, or in terms of developing?
No. You know, I've said before, I think in this conversation, that I think it's been contaminated by perception.
Right.
You know, it's been, you know, you pay the newspapers. But we have a certification from Al Hazel, as I mentioned earlier, as a result of the lawsuit, that says that it's clean, clear, and acceptable for development.
And so you never had any concern about your personal health or
No.
about your cows?
No. No.
Never.
There's been no evidence whatsoever. And, you know, to really get the most out of a cow, you grow your own heifers, your own replacement cattle. You grow them so that you pull that calf out of the cow and you raise the heifers, the girls. You make them into cows, and they stick with you for 11, 12 years. And then they have babies, and then their babies, you make cows out of them, and they stick with you, and then their babies have. So if there was a problem, you know what I'm saying, that it would have showed up, because that trees out to generations upon generations upon generations.
Right.
Something would have showed up, and nothing has showed up, nothing, zero.
On a somewhat related topic, you've discussed your relations with the DOE managers,
Yeah.
the people that you've come to
You know,
know.
most of the DOE managers were very gentle, kind, nice guys that wanted to help me, but they were caught up in the Rocky Flats bureaucracy as much as anybody else. I'm not saying everybody out there is a son of a bitch, but it is such a bureaucracy, it's so much government being government, nobody can do anything. I'll tell you a story. I got a call from Rocky Flats 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they said, your irrigation water is running all over the place out here and it's wiping out one of our roads. It was in section 13. And I said, okay, I'll meet you out there. So I met them out there, and there were a bunch of department heads and so forth. And I looked and I said, well, it's not, yes, it's my water. I'm running irrigation water down from that reservoir that you see straight up, that Smart Reservoir. I was running it down, the area I'm talking about was in here, and I was running it down, filling these two lakes. And they said, you're causing this erosion. And I said, no, your culvert that you put into my ditch so you could drive across the ditch, put a pipe in the ditch and drive across it. I said, your culvert's blocked up. I said, I shouldn't have to maintain your culvert. You should have actually asked me for permission before you put the culvert in. But I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. But your culvert is, so they said, well, what do you suggest we do? I said, you better call a backhoe operator or somebody and come in and dig it up. And they said, well, my gosh, we'll have to get permission. We have to put it out for bid. We have to talk to purchasing. And it could take 5 or 6 weeks before we could get a backhoe in here. I mean, does that sound like government? It's
Right.
it's so clunked up with all these rules and regs. So they're over there huddling and talking, and I went over and I looked upstream, and I'm looking down on this culvert, and I see this little bitty little whirlpool, just a little faint whirlpool. I said, well, some water's getting through there. So I had a shovel in my truck, long-handled shovel, round point. I got it out and I shoved it in there and I twisted and pulled back, nothing happened. I shoved it in, got down on my knee and shoved it with my arm all the way in there, and I twisted it and turned it around and I pulled it, and all of a sudden it went just like that, and this tumbleweed came blowing out of the other end. The problem was fixed just like that. I said, well, you don't have a problem anymore. And every one of those department heads said, my God, this is the most productive day we've had out here in years. So, you know, they're kind of stuck too. So it's just, I'm surprised they get anything done. And so I'm sure with their legal department, they just, they figure, I don't know, I mean, as their neighbor, I just was the recipient of just getting screwed over all the time, in my opinion.
Do you differentiate between the DOE people and the contractors at all?
No.
Yeah, they're the same. What about your relations with the protesters?
I never was one to be a part of the protesters. There was one time that they built a teepee on my ground, and it was on the corner of Highway 93 and 72. So they built this teepee on my ground, and they had camped, and they were, this was 10, 12, 15 years ago, and you know, frankly, most of them were just a bunch of hippies. My experience with some of the protesters were, some of them went out there and they, you know, I can remember one time I said, what the hell are you guys doing out here? And this gal said, we're protesting this damn airport they're going to build out here. So I mean, it was just a party to them. So they were on my ground, and the DOE and I think it was Rockwell, or maybe it was somebody, maybe, I guess it was Rockwell. Guards were there, and they said, we can't touch them, they're on private ground. And they said, can you help us, Charlie? I said, sure. And I went over and I talked to them, and I said, you guys had better get the you're on private ground, get the teepee off and clear out of here. And I said, I don't want to fight with you, I don't want any trouble. But I said, if you don't, I'm going to run about 50 head of cattle right through the bunch of you. And I said, that'll knock that teepee down anyway. It's up to you guys. I mean, I don't want to start trouble with you. You're on private ground, and I want you out of here. And they said, okay, man, and they cleared out. So I mean, I thought they treated me right. I told them how it was, and of course the guards and everybody thought I was a good guy then. Once in a while they thought I was a good guy. Most of the time I'm sure they thought I was not a good guy.
But then other times you said you let them put the pole up on your...
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so.
Sure. I mean, like I said, I mean, even with the environmental community, I mean, who's outside more than the environmental community? A farmer and a rancher. When it's Christmas Eve and it's 20 below zero and the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour, a rancher's out there. If somebody goes through the fence, a rancher's out there and he's fixing it, and he's taking care of the ground, and he's living with the ground and working with the ground, you know, all the time, every day. And you got to love it or you wouldn't do it. You can't make much money at it. I said, I was going to say any money. Sometimes you make a little money, but sometimes your paydays are years apart.
So it sounds like you didn't share your opinions with the protesters, but you also shared some frustration with Rocky Flats, right? Oh
yeah, I mean, I didn't get in bed with the protesters. They had their own thing, and I like I say, I didn't think I needed. I mean, I've been busy all my life working and doing cows or land development or trying to raise my kids. I have 5 kids and then 1 stepson. And I walk out of the house every morning at 7 and try to get home every day by 7. Saturday I quit by about 4:30, and Sunday sometimes I take off. Sometimes I don't. But I have no time to be involved with peace marches and hippies and protesters. And again, you could be a hippie if you want, I guess. In my days, in my ways, we all were hippies of different sorts. So.
What about the rank and file workers? Did you have any interaction with them?
The rank and file workers, only that I'll go back to the stories of working with them on day-to-day on issues, whether it be running water through the Rocky Flats plant. I remember one time, I'll give you another example. A number of years ago, 15 years ago, Rocky Flats was complaining about what do they do with all the water. Westminster didn't want the water that came through the plant. They didn't want it getting into Stanley Lake. Great Western Reservoir, Broomfield didn't want it. So they had all this excess water. And they were building lakes and doing everything they could to get, to handle this water and contain it on site, retain it. Not detain it, but retain it. And so I thought, wait a minute, there's washing of gravel takes water, and it's dry up at Highway 93. So I contacted them and I said, maybe I can help you, because I could consume that water by washing gravel with it, and it would not get into the drinking water supply. And I said, but I've got to know, and that you've got to tell me now, and then got to be able to prove to me that it's clean and clear. Because again, it was perception. See, it's perception. Westminster and Broomfield didn't want it, and North Glen and Thornton didn't want it, and but they were claiming it was clean. And I said, well, if it's clean, I can use it for gravel washing, and then you won't have to have Westminster mad at you because you're dumping, you're letting your water leave the plant. So, but I said, and they said, oh, it's clean, it's above state standards. So I said, well, give me your stuff. I don't know how to read. How do you read all this stuff? I don't know how to read. You have to be a scientist to know how to read. And so they gave me all the information. So I showed it to Howard Holm, and he said, well, we've got a guy, Steve, that was doing work for us. He's more of a scientist type guy. He can review it for us and tell us if it's all right. As it turns out, 3 days later, I find it's 9 times above state standard. Now, if I had to use that water to wash gravel, first thing we could have had, $500,000 worth of gravel that we couldn't even be allowed to haul off the plant, because I guess you could make the claim that just because you put it under a road, over time, snow melts and rain, and over 100 years, it gets down in the water supply, in the aquifer. Those are some examples. But the rank and file, I mean, I would have to deal with them in trying to solve my basic problems. And again, it's that shovel story.
Right.
It's just, I mean, I'm sure that to change a light bulb, they took, half a dozen people, Probably had 4 people twisting the ladder and 1 guy holding the bulb.
Someone filling out the paperwork, right?
Yeah, another guy, another 2 or 3 doing the paperwork, right.
Did you ever have to get any security clearances or anything for?
I never, that's a whole different story. I never did. Back in the old days when Uncle Mark first sold to them, they hadn't thought about security clearances. Mm-hmm. My agreement, I maintained the ditches, I maintained water rights through the plant, and so they tried to make me get security clearances, and I actually passed all the tests and everything to get security clearance as an accommodation to Steve Sheeswell. Mm-hmm. And then they gave me this big book and said, read this book. Now you have to read this book And I said, no, I'm not doing that. I said, I passed your test, I did all the stuff. I'm not doing it. I said, you can keep your badge. I don't need it. So no, I don't do it. I mean, I don't abuse it. I go in there for the purpose of what I'm supposed to be in there for. I call them and tell them. I always call the shift commander and I tell them that I'm going to be in there and what I'm doing. And if I say I'm going to go in at 10 and I'll be out at 11, or if I'm going in at 7 in the morning and I'll be out by 8 and I'm in a white Ford pickup, I do it. So I don't flaunt it. I don't abuse it. If they take my lock off the gate, I take a bolt cutter and cut their chain and put my lock back on it. It's not vindictive. It's just that I just do it because we're allowed to do it, I don't want to push it, and I don't want to have them push me. So I just do what I've always done.
They don't send anyone with you?
No.
And nothing has changed since September 11th? Anything like
Oh, it was. I got to tell you, there were times when they did try to push me. The guards tried to beat up on me. What are you doing in there? Not physically beat up, but just get in my face for being in. I just get right back in their face over it. And so I was probably came off to them that I was somewhat of a jerk, because I would get in their face and they probably weren't used to having people get. I'd just say, call your legal department. I have a perfect right to be in there. Don't be messing with me. But when 9/11 happened, that was a different story. For me to come in there and swagger around and misuse my right to enter I didn't think it was appropriate. So an amazing thing happened. I started being a lot nicer to them, and they started being a lot nicer to me. So probably if I had been nicer to them years before. But on the other hand, if I had been too nice to them, they probably would have locked me out.
Right.
When they had the first Saddam Hussein deal, they tried to lock us out of our clay pit, and I had a big war with them then. I mean, a big war. I mean, I told them, you better get the mounted police and the helicopters and a whole bunch more people, because I'm coming and going as we always have for years. And I must say, to their credit, they put a cell phone in our semi that we were hauling clay with, and said, call and we'll open the gate and we'll follow them in and follow them out. You can come and go and we'll escort you in and out. So that it could have turned, what I was afraid would happen is it could have turned ugly, and if they could have gotten their foot in the door, they would have locked me out. I would still be out today. Right. I mean, so you have to be somewhat forceful. Mm-hmm. If you aren't forceful, they would have taken a lot of advantage of me. And they even admitted it. When I would get in the guard's face and talk to the commanding guys, and I'd say, if I let you guys get away with this, you'll have me locked out of here in less than 10 days. I'll never get back in. They said, you're probably right. And they said, you're probably right, and I admire you for standing up the thing. And I said, now I'm going to cool off, and you cool off. Why don't you talk to the legal department? Here's my home number. Here's my card. Here's my cell number. Call me, and we'll figure out a way to work it out. But in the beginning, they were shouting at me, and I was shouting at them.
Were you ever concerned about security at the plant?
You mean that they had poor security?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who got on the property.
Well, don't forget, I'm a buffer zone guy.
Right.
I'm way out here. I'm way out here on the edge. I'm doing my water stuff. This is true buffer zone. The core of the plant. I wouldn't think of going into the core of the plant. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't think of that. I have no business in there. I should have been locked up and arrested for trespassing because I had no business in there. I mean, that's a whole different deal. But doing what I'm allowed to do, maintain my ditches, keep the ponds full, do what I do, go to the West Spray Field, do my gravel. Right. In fact, I have locks on almost all their gates, padlocks. Uh-huh. But if I had abused it, I should have had my ass kicked and been thrown in jail.
Right. Okay. Winding down. These are just sort of wrap-up questions. How do you feel about sort of the nuclear industry and the national security in the aftermath of the Cold War, and having had all the interaction you did with Rocky Flats?
Oh, I'm sure it's all necessary stuff. Good and necessary stuff. It's just that they put a lot of it on our back.
Yeah.
And it's still a lot of it is on our back. But it surely is necessary. Sure, we live in the greatest country in the world.
Did your involvement with Rocky Flats change you, do you feel like, in any way?
Yeah. It changed. First of all, as a land developer, I work with counties, I work with cities, I work with the state. That's a lot of government to work with alone. And then you pile Rocky Flats on top of that. And then have them, you know, yeah, sure, it changed me. You could tell. I mean, you probably think I should move to Montana and be one of those militia men. and I mean, sure, it changes you. So being screwed over by government, you goddamn right, it pisses you off.
You didn't feel that way about the federal government before?
No, no. But you know, you're sum total of all of your experiences, and I had a lot of bad experiences with them, and I found them to be less than honest and less than honorable and less than ethical, and still find them to be that way. But I'm a big boy, and you know, the world's not perfect. You just figure out a way to crawl through, walk through, go around, and go on with your life.
Did you ever feel that you were being harassed, or?
No. No, I don't think I have been harassed. I mean, if they had watched me, you know, if they showed it to a lot of the people, your interview with me, if it wasn't on the wind down part, the right parties would say, he's a crazy son of a bitch. Just give him all the heat you can. Never settle with him. Just screw him over as much as you can, because I think they would do that. I think that's the mentality out there. Harass? No. Yeah. No.
It's more stonewalled than...
Yeah, more stonewalled, exactly. You know, if they tried to harass me, I just got right back in their face to the point that they'd say, whoa, that guy. I mean, you know, when they would have the lockdowns of the plant where you couldn't even get in, I would deliberately go up and say, I want to go into the gravel pit, and they'd say, you can't be in there. I say, I have every right to be in here. I'd get right in there. I said, I want to see the chief. I want to see whoever's the top dog here, and I want to go in. And they'd come up, and we'd talk, and he'd say, God, you're the one guy I didn't think about. And I said, well, I'm here to push this. I'm here specifically to push this. Because you shouldn't be locking me out, and you should have thought of me. And you should have thought that we have to get clay in and not, clay out of here and gravel out of here. And but you know what? Over the next 24 hours, we got it resolved. So I don't know. Maybe I harassed them.
Sounds like it.
Well, I wasn't trying to. You know, basically, again, it's the old give them an inch or they'll take a mile. I mean, they really would, and they admit it.
Right.
When I would tell them, look, if I let you guys get away with this, you'll have me out of here. And they'd say, you're probably right. More power to you. Let me call legal. Let me call my boss. And okay, I'm going to leave now. I'm going to leave you alone. But no, I don't think they ever picked on me. Never picked on me.
Right. Anything we missed? Any stories that?
There are probably a lot of stories. You can tell I'm a story guy, but yeah. I think I've covered most of the highlights of them. And over the next 15, 20 years, I think you're going to see a big difference out around Rocky Flats. I think you're going to see some good quality development. I hope that the Department of Wildlife allows some trails through there, even if it's around the edges. There's got to be ways to figure out to do it without impacting health and safety and still make it available to folks.
Okay, well, we are out of time. Thank
Good.
you so much.
Okay.
This is great. I really
Good.
appreciate it.
Good. All right. Okay, you go to the Rocky Flats hearings and you hear scientists talk about parts per trillion, and homeowners and other folks, enviros, they start wringing their hands and say, oh my God, parts per trillion, oh no. And I think, good Lord, what is parts per trillion? I would have no idea. It sounds like a small amount. So in a Farmer and Ranchers magazine, I found this thing, and it's kind of interesting. Parts per trillion, we often reference to parts per trillion in our everyday reading or conversations about trace mineral contaminants and chemicals. How big is a part per trillion? Listed below are a few interesting comparisons to help put 1 part per trillion into perspective. A square inch in 250 square miles. That's part per trillion. A pinch of salt on 10,000 potato chips. It's part per trillion. 1 postage stamp in an area the size of Texas. 1 flea in 360 million elephants. Now, I suppose some mathematician would argue that that's incorrect, and it may not be exactly perfect correct, but I think it really does put into perspective parts per trillion. So when you got, they're beating up on Rocky Flats and talking about parts per trillion, it's not that much. So as we wrap up, I saw that thing. I put it under here, and that's a called Rocky Flats. I guess that wrap.
When I watched today, you said, wow, that's, I think so. But if you like